found the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. We are building a liberty machine here. For those of you watching on Facebook Live and over at paulharrell.com, we got kind of a three-person split screen in here. I want to welcome back to the studio. We have Secretary of State Mark Martin is with us. Mark, thanks for joining us, sir.
Thank you for having me on again.
Absolutely. And we have Pastor Iverson Jackson is with us, who's going to be at the Arkansas State University Student Union giving the keynote speech for the Arkansas State Young Republicans. Iverson, welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you, Paul.
Really glad that you could be here. Let's start with you.
Okay.
The speech here, this is 7:30 tonight, and Arkansas State University Young Republicans, as well as State Representative Dan Sullivan, bringing you in. And the topic is One Nation Under God. Tell us a little bit about that.
One Nation Under God, that's that part, One Nation Under God, that's what we are. That's what our founders envisioned when you look at the Declaration of Independence, when they talk about we owe these truths to be self-evident, that, that we are endowed by our Creator. So they acknowledge that we are a creator. And then they go on to tell us that our Creator gives us certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Among, them, we have many more than that, but those are the ones that they named. Mm-hmm. And so those only come when you're one nation under God. You look at any nation that disavows God, they don't have the liberty that we have, and that's why we have the illegal immigration problem that we have. People are not fighting to get out of America. They're fighting to get in America because this is where freedom lives.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And there actually is, a lot of people don't realize this in today's day and age, but, the idea of founding a country, recognizing the existence of a higher power.
Right.
You look at totalitarian states, and they are the higher power. They don't recognize that. So it's kind of about establishing the country in humility.
Absolutely.
Versus, saying we have it all figured out. So there's a theology there.
Absolutely.
About the Creator.
Right. This is what guided our founders. And I know you'll have people say, well, you had founders that didn't even believe in God, or, they were deists and so forth and so on. That does not mean that they did not understand and agree with the principles of liberty that are found in the Holy Scriptures. And that's where people are missing it. They're missing, like, for instance, with Thomas Jefferson. When you look at his monument in Washington, D.C., I've been there many, many times, and you'll see statements that he made about God, and you would think this man is a Pentecostal. And here people are saying that he wasn't, that he didn't believe in God. Well, that's about as far from the truth as you can get. He read his Bible, he knew what the Bible says, and he understood that these liberties that we enjoy today, the few that are left, only come from God and not from man. And if something comes from God, then no man can take it away from you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I want to turn now to Secretary of State Mark Martin. So Mark, what brings you here to this neck of the woods for this event tonight?
I was just invited up by my friend Dan Sullivan, and I figured I'd come up and show some support for him.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, one nation under God, that's something that I think a lot of people here in Arkansas, it really resonates with.
Yes.
And you see what the state of the country is now, and there's no question that we're kind of experiencing what looks like to be a slow moral decay. Talk about that a little bit.
Well,
or your thoughts on that?
One of the things that I would actually start with is whether or not we recognize it, or any country recognizes it or not, we're under God. We're either under God's judgment or we're under His blessing. Whether or not we want to recognize His sovereignty in the matter or not, that's really the starting point. I'm reminded of a quote by Abraham Kuyper I'd like to read to you. He says, "There's not one square inch of the whole domain of human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry, mine." What's he talking about whenever he's developing these ideas? Well, the overall idea that is going on here is everything that's going on is under God's authority. How does He then delegate His authority in the world? And God first delegates who has more authority over you than anyone else. Ultimately, everybody would say God. But then, you move away from God, and then you're talking about the authority that an individual has over his own self-discipline. Now, Kuyper looked at things from spheres going out from oneself. As you go farther and farther from oneself, your personal authority diminishes, and you get a situation where more and more things are delegated to God to take care of. You hear some of the Austrian economists call it the invisible hand.
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. Good morning to everybody out there. You have found the intersection of conservative ideas and reality where we are building a liberty machine, and we need your help to do this. Government must be tended to. The phone number, if you want to call us or text us this morning, 870-275-9799. You can also sound off, watch us live at facebook.com/Conduit News. And we are available on, multiple platforms, YouTube, live stream, conduitnews.com. Just let us know what you think. So, man, we've got a good show for you. Hey, you know what? We're going to talk a little bit about the bottom of the next hour. So at 7:33, we're going to be talking a little bit about the tariffs situation. I think you're going to really enjoy our guest. He's very knowledgeable on this subject. We'll be interviewing Conduit co-founder Mr. Joe Maynard coming up at 7:33 today on these tariffs of steel and aluminum. He's in the aerospace industry. He knows a thing or two, and it's amazing to hear his perspective on and how President Trump is standing up to what has been done to this country, with the jobs being essentially exported, our businesses being exported, how we can't make anything here in this country anymore, how that's actually a national security threat. We're going to be talking about that at 7:33. Big news yesterday. When we got off the air, we found out that the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Colorado baker. That's right. You don't have to bake the cake. You don't have to bake the cake. What a huge victory. Does anybody think? Now, I know it was a 7-2 decision. You had Breyer and you had Kagan, the liberals, on the court. Breyer and Kagan were the liberals, and they sided with the conservatives, along with Anthony Kennedy, who wrote the majority opinion, saying, you know what? You don't have to bake the cake. Now, that's the simple. We're going to get into the details of this, the esoteric details of the First Amendment. But before we do that, I just want to take a moment and pause here, because I want to recognize something. If Hillary Clinton were president of the United States, there wouldn't have been a Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, and this case would have turned out drastically differently. Because I know one thing, Breyer and Kagan are not necessarily the kind of justices that rule consistent or on principle. And I promise you, the grief they would have gotten from a President Hillary Clinton had they not attacked religious freedom in this country, had they not said to that baker, no, you will make the cake because society is the owner of your skills, and you have no religious freedom outside church. You have freedom of worship, but you don't have freedom of religion. And that book that you believe in is discriminatory. That book you believe in offends society. Folks, if Hillary Clinton would have won, that's exactly what I'd be talking about today, if I could even talk at all. It would be about the end of religious freedom in this country. It would be about the end. And I'm telling you, there was a ton of people, I believe, that voted for Donald Trump, not because they agreed with everything he said, not because they thought he was some sort of moral standard, which he wasn't, and he didn't campaign to be. They voted for Donald Trump for the sole reason they believed that under Hillary Clinton,
I talked to people. One person who was a very liberal-minded person and has always been left of center, but is a Christian, is a biblical, evangelical Christian. And this person told me they voted for Trump for the sole reason that they believed that if Hillary Clinton had won the presidency, it would herald and begin the end of the concept of religious freedom in this country. There's a ton of people who are like that. Because there's a difference to those on the left, on the far left. I'm talking, progressives who believe that atheism is not a worldview that can be put on top of other people. It's only Christianity or other religions, and really it's only Christianity because they're perfectly fine with Islam. It's only Christianity that is discriminatory against other people, but atheism is not a worldview because it's a science or whatever they would say. But the people on the far left believe that worship is not something that you do and live out, the way a biblical Christian would do it. What is the key purpose of man? To worship God and enjoy Him forever. They think that freedom of worship, and Obama would never say. But Obama quit saying. You've got to go back and listen to what he said. He quit saying we have the freedom of religion. He would say we have the freedom of worship, the idea of what you do inside four walls with the roof over your head, that's worship one day a week. But you better not bring those offensive ideas out into the mainstream, out into the public. You just better be glad that we're allowing you to have your freedom of association. We haven't taken that away from you yet. That was the direction that we were going in this country, and I'm just saying today is a huge day. Today is a huge day. What has been decided, and it's not completely blanket or conclusive, but and I think that's fair. I think that's fair and proper. Now, I would like a better, more comprehensive understanding of the First Amendment, a reassertion of the First Amendment, if you will. Congress shall make no law, but they haven't gotten there yet. The idea that if Congress doesn't make a law discriminating against religion, Congress, if they don't make a law, then everything's fine. Meaning, get over your offendedness and go live your life. They didn't go that far, but what they did say is on a situation by situation basis, look, you, the baker, were clearly discriminated against by the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, or let's just call it the Colorado Civil Rights Tribunal, because that's really what this was. Now, we say we can look at all this, but to me, I mean, the way I see it is, if you're that cake baker, and there's very few people that make the point, they'll talk about your services being property of the state, which obviously you can go that direction. They'll talk about your religious convictions, like my religious convictions, because let's say I disagree with gay marriage. I can't perform. I don't want to serve you because of what I believe marriage to be. But it actually goes further than that, because if you have, let's just take a biblical definition, what is believed by many to be the biblical definition of marriage, one man and one woman, and then you have a biblical concept of marriage and what that means and how religious that is, and how that is a picture of Christ and his bride, the church, and all of the significance, everything that it means. And you're a baker, and now you're being asked to not only provide a service, but in a way participate in a ceremony that you believe has a vast and heightened religious significance to you. That is really, I think, more egregious than saying, you owe your services to us. I mean, that's just as dangerous. But if you really go further into it, forcing somebody to participate in a religious ceremony, that's really what the issue is with this whole thing, was forcing somebody, a private citizen with a business, to participate in what they believe to be a religious ceremony that is, let's say, different or corrupt from what they believe that ceremony really is. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what this was all about. A 7-2 decision here was shocking to me. I had no idea you're going to have Kagan and Breyer cross over. Everybody pretty much knew, if you were following the oral arguments in front of the Supreme Court, that Anthony Kennedy, who was, pretty much kind of the swing vote here in most of these cases, that he was just not happy with this, that he could detect a double standard. And there were even liberal justices, obviously, according to reports now, that said that they had a big problem with this. Let's take a look at the Associated Press here. Associated Press, the Supreme Court on Monday sided with a Colorado baker who refused to create a wedding cake for a same-sex couple, but it left undecided whether a business owner's religious beliefs or free speech rights can justify refusing some services to gay people. So again, it's more of a situational basis here. Justices Anthony Kennedy, writing for the majority in the 7-2 decision, relied on narrow grounds, saying a state commission had violated the Constitution's protection of religious freedom in ruling against the baker, Jack Phillips. Quote, the neutral and respectful consideration to which Phillips was entitled was compromised here. This is Kennedy's opinion. The Civil Rights Commission's treatment of his case has some elements of a clear and impermissible hostility towards the sincere religious beliefs that motivated his objection. What they are saying is, and if you go and read the opinion, which we're going to do here in a minute, I'm going to highlight some things here in a minute. He's saying that the Civil Rights Tribunal in Colorado, they had an open hostility, especially one of the members. They openly disdained, had a hostility towards Christianity. And they were trying to put somebody in their place. They were trying to take away somebody's rights. They were trying to force compliance. They were trying to be what Andrew Breitbart referred to as totalitarian freaks. They were haters of freedom. They were haters of liberty. They didn't understand that your freedom ends where mine begins. They had no concept of that. They didn't respect that. This is a victory today for the concept of individual liberty and individual rights. I don't care if it is, it doesn't dive in and reassert the First Amendment the way we would want to. Folks, I want you to put yourself in the minds here of the baker. Put yourself in the minds of the baker. And put yourself in Jack Phillips is his name. And so here's a guy who's been put through the ringer, and he's probably thought many times that his own government, that he may very well be the poster child for the Supreme Court, to the highest court in the land, to basically declare that America, the concept of America, is now over. I mean, and it's only a matter of time before they come for you too, before you do something. And yet he takes it, he goes through the system, and the highest court in the land says, you know what? You have been wronged. The First Amendment does matter. One of the 5 freedoms in the First Amendment, to religious freedom, does matter. And you, sir, have been wronged by this Colorado Commission. And I'm going to keep calling it a tribunal. I mean, that's essentially what this is. The Spanish Inquisition. And if you disagree with the government, if you disagree with, this is, they're trying, and again, coincidentally, well, not coincidentally, if you don't believe in coincidence, last week, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? I think it was 2 weeks ago. I had a segment on, the 10 Commandments, that the monument down there at the Capitol that's been put up. Oh, by the way, I kind of dismissed the fact that the guy who ran over the 10 Commandments at Little Rock was acquitted for insanity. I forgot that he did this in Oklahoma, so forgive me. But this guy ran over the 10 Commandments in Oklahoma, was somehow acquitted of that crime, I think for the same reason, still has a driver's license, drives down to Arkansas. I'm assuming he had a driver's license. Maybe not. I guess if you're going to run over a Ten Commandment statue, you would. It's kind of like the gun-free zones, right? If you're wanting to kill somebody, you don't really mind breaking a gun law. Anyway, I might cover that later on, maybe tomorrow. But I was covering the Ten Commandments. We were covering the lawsuits that are now filed against the state of Arkansas by the Religious Freedom Association. You have these people that want to put a satanic statue of Baphomet. They're claiming that because there's a Ten Commandment statue, which can be argued as either a historical monument, it can also be argued that it is a religious monument. I mean, it clearly is. It's the foundation for our laws, Western civilization. But it was filed as a bill, passed out of 2 committees and 2 chambers, and signed by the governor. I mean, what are you going to do? Like, if what I have said for the, if the satanic people want to find a representative to file that bill so they can put their statue up, and then you don't put it up, then you have a case. But one of the main points that I made 2 weeks ago, and I'm not the first person to make this, but it is the fact that for some reason in secular society, they pretend that secularism is not a worldview because they like to think of themselves as right. They like to argue from this position of rightness and science, and because they think, well, we know so much now, we know so much more now than we ever did back then. And you know what? The more I research history, I'm not so sure that's true. I'm not so sure that that's true. I mean, good grief. You know, it's said that this mountain of technology that we're climbing, of knowledge and wisdom, and and science is trying to get to the top of this mountain, and when they get there, they're going to see theologians who've been there the whole time. We're going to take a break. You're listening to Conduit News Radio. Big day for America. We'll be back in just a moment.
In a world full of constituents with social media accounts, bloggers just looking to increase their page views, and a talk radio host who generally is just the worst, how are Little Rock's elite supposed to conduct business with such a lack of privacy? Introducing the 1835 Club, older and more refined than other clubs that claim discretion. The 1835 Club is for seasoned political veterans that want to conduct the highest form of aristocratic business with the public's money. Are you a schemer? Do you someday want a guaranteed flow of taxpayer money to support your business? Is it your dream to see the .gov domain at the end of your business website? Don't listen to the imitators. The 1835 Club is the place where corrupt politicians and businessmen hatch their next crony schemes. At the 1835 Club, we make lobbying safe and legal. Ethics. Why, of course. All business is done in an ethical manner. Just look for the sign above the door that reads, loophole. Are you tired of the Capitol Police restricting your access to the roof after a perfectly good night of drinking? The 1835 Club has libations and a perfectly good roof. Other crony clubs that promise discretion try to lure you in by advertising bars made out of aeroplanes. Well, at the 1835 Club, instead of an airplane fuselage, we've got a space shuttle. No, not a bar. We've got an actual space shuttle that makes a daily run to the moon so members of the 1835 Club can have some real privacy away from the bloggers and taxpayers. Are you an Arkansas aristocrat? Do you want to be? It's the 1835 Club, and we work tirelessly to make sure the good old boy system remains alive and well. Join today.
Disclaimer. The 1835 Club reserves the right to deny membership to anyone who has principles. Any talk of the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution must be done in jest or, at the very least, with a condescending tone. And finally, the 1835 Club will be given a 25% commission of any agreements made between politicians and the business community.
PHP Parody. Need your daily news fix? Don't forget to tune in to Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
I got a slight correction here. Thank you for our smart audience on Facebook. I have a correction. Somebody says that it wasn't Breyer who was in the affirmative. It was actually Ginsburg, which is crazy. And I just didn't think she'd be awake enough. I thought she would just be voting no on everything. Yeah, so I'm sorry. It was Kagan and Ginsburg that crossed over to get to the 7-2, and it was Sotomayor and Breyer who were the two dissenting votes in the 7-2 decision. That is, again, really huge. You don't have to bake that cake. You don't have to do it in this situation. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going... that if you were to have a genuine religious conviction, that you're not going to get sued, and this is going to have to. But at least there's the precedent now, and the Supreme Court has ruled on this. Now, I saw that Pastor Dan Borum is watching the program today, and Dan says that they're going to come after a minister next for refusing to perform a gay marriage. Now, that's very likely. That's very possible that that's the case, that could come next. However, Dan, and I'm going to do this here in the next segment, Dan, and for the rest of you listening, I decided to take a look at this opinion, this Supreme Court opinion. And I was just curious as to how many times in the opinion the phrase gay marriage was listed. How many times did it appear in the opinion? And from what I can tell, did a word search on it, and the phrase gay marriage appears 8 times in this decision. And each time that it mentions gay marriage, for the most part, is one of the most interesting parts of the opinion, because it's reasserting First Amendment rights and exposing the discrimination of Mr. Phillips here, of Jack Phillips. I mean, isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing? It was the complete opposite. It was the complete opposite. And here we had somebody was absolutely right, in my opinion, and somebody was absolutely wrong. You had the same-sex couple. They were claiming they were discriminated against. You had the cake baker who had religious convictions, but guess what? Turns out the court ruled he was the one discriminated against. Let me say that again. He was the one who was discriminated against. You know, I've been kind of fascinated in the last week. Here in Arkansas, we're arguing over the bad tort reform amendment that we all have to vote on this November, issue number 1. And I've been very frustrated because you have traditional pro-life Arkansas groups who fight for the unborn and fight for the elderly. They're saying that this bill is not pro-life. But then you have Republican politicians who are terrified to not be on the side of the pro-life. And they're saying, no, it is pro-life. And I think it's so funny when you have both sides claiming, I'm being discriminated against. No, I'm being discriminated against. When they're both claiming the same thing, I feel like oftentimes one person is black and white, either right or wrong, and the other is black and white, either right or wrong. I mean, when you have both sides that are disagreeing, but they're both claiming their bill does the same thing, or their policy does the same thing, somebody is completely wrong in that situation, and somebody is completely right. That was the case here with the I almost said gay cake baker, but that's just me taking a story and condensing it into a very confusing phrase. Back in a moment.
Some people call it providence or whatever. So when we begin to talk about ultimately where we're at, some things may come and go. We may not be one nation. We may not be a nation at all. But one thing that we will be is under God.
Yeah, that's very well said. You just think about where the state does come in. You talk about delegating authority. That's certainly a part, of the whole situation.
Right.
You have Paul in the New Testament saying, "Hey, we hope that we are able under the state to go about the gospel in peace."
Right.
There is certainly evidence out there of
Absolutely.
where it's easier, when you're freer, things are a lot easier. I mean, versus the totalitarian history that we have in the 20th century alone.
Well, and that's what's unique about this country is when we begin to look at the delegation of authority from that perspective, we see that it's centered on individuals. Every individual is endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. What we see here is a biblical pattern for government taking shape. Whether or not you believe in a creator or nature, I think it's evident in nature even that individual rights are what are supreme, because the individual is the one that's delegated the most authority to supervise himself. And of course, what's supervising ourselves? That's taking responsibility, right? So the pattern that the founders put together, whether or not they recognize it as a creator or as natural law, it's what's naturally the order of things, and self-government is the first order. And when you say the smallest form of self-government is individual.
That's correct.
So what you were pointing out there is a very, very deep theological concept.
Yeah. So we're talking with Secretary of State Mark Martin and Pastor Iverson Jackson. Iverson is going to be at Arkansas State University tonight with the ASU Young College Republicans, giving this talk about, one nation under God. It's very exciting. So tell us a little bit about, if you can, if you go all the way back to the founding and you go to what all of the sermons that were preached up and down the colonies, beforehand, it had a lot to do with what we're talking about. Being an individual before a holy God, being responsible. That's something. And then all of a sudden you start to think, well, if everybody is equal under God, then how come there's a royal bloodline that's somehow more special than everybody else?
Yeah. Go back to the Constitution, what you were talking about, and the connection with one nation under God. What our Constitution really is a collection of sermon topics. When you go through it and look at it, it's a collection of sermon topics that were preached up and down the colonies, that, as you stated earlier, up and down the colonies, that our founders just start putting these things together.
The intersection of conservative ideas and reality. Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Nope. No. I don't know if there's conflicting reports out there or what, but it was Ginsburg. It was, in fact, Ginsburg who was a part of the dissent. Ginsburg and Sotomayor dissented. That's how it happened. Ginsburg and Sotomayor dissented. It was Breyer and Kagan that crossed over to get to the 7-2 decision. Anyway, the bottom line is there were liberal justices that voted with the conservative justices and the swing justice. So anyway, it was Ginsburg and Sotomayor who dissented. Again, can you imagine if Hillary Clinton had won? Do you think that this would have been? You think these liberal justices? I just don't think they would have. There's just no way. Can you imagine the wrath of the Hillary Clinton administration if they affirmed somebody's religious freedom? These people aren't for religious freedom. I mean, they're not. They are for. They're for religious freedom if it gets them political points, moving us closer towards less freedom. Which I think that's why. By the way, this might be controversial, but I don't think there's too many people that would disagree. I mean, I think that's why, you when I said, somebody texted me and said, if this had been, what would the left have done if this was a Muslim cake baker? Would there have been as much attention paid to it? And the answer is no, there wouldn't have been, because for some reason, The left sees the religion of Islam in America as a potential victim or a victim that they can use for political power and gain and everything else. And if you really want to assume worse motives, if you honestly know, if you think that the left's intention is total control, and you know that part of Sharia law and jihad is total control, well, then there is a little bit of an alignment there, right, with the direction that both people want to move towards, which is the absence of individuality, absence of true freedom and critical thought, and the golden rule. So, yeah, that's an interesting similarity. But to correct my correction, it's terrible. What a terrible example I am at this point. This is not, it's not good. To correct my correction, it was Ginsburg and Sotomayor who were dissenting. I didn't think it would be. That's why it was strange when I had a listener correct me. Anyway, okay, let's get into a little bit more of this historic decision in favor of the First Amendment and religious freedom. If you go to the opinion, Joe, go to the opinion. I decided to search for the phrase gay marriage throughout this opinion. And if you search for the phrase gay marriage, it really kind of is a condensed Cliff Notes version of this opinion. That it really helps things, puts things in. You kind of get a drive-by reading of this opinion. So here it is. This is the first mention of gay marriage, mentioned 1 of 8 in this in this opinion. The laws and the Constitution can, and in some instances must, protect gay persons and gay couples in the exercise of their civil rights. But religious and philosophical objections to gay marriage are protected views and in some instances protected forms of expression. See Oberfell versus Hodges. Okay, let's go to the next reference of gay marriage in this opinion. That was 1 of 8, and then we go to 2 of 8. I'm going to scroll up here. This is on, I guess, page 2. That Colorado law can protect gay persons in acquiring products and services on the same terms and conditions as are offered to other members of the public. The law must be applied in a manner that is neutral towards religion. To Phillips, his claim, Jack Phillips, that using his artistic skills to make an expressive statement, a wedding endorsement, in his own voice and his own creation, has a significant First Amendment speech component and implicates his deep and sincere religious beliefs. His dilemma was understandable in 2012, which was before Colorado recognized the validity of gay marriages performed in the state, and before this court issued United States versus Windsor, Oberfell. Yeah, so that's the gay marriage decisions. Given the state's position at the time, there is some force to Phillips' argument that he was not unreasonable in deeming his decision lawful. State law at the time also afforded storekeepers some latitude to decline to create specific messages they considered offensive. Indeed, while the instant enforcement proceedings were pending, the state civil rights division concluded in at least 3 cases that a baker acted lawfully in declining to create cakes with decorations that demeaned gay persons or gay marriages. Phillips was entitled to a neutral and respectful consideration of his claims in all the circumstances of the case. Let's stop there. So now we have a freedom of expression argument here as well, which this is not just necessarily, although they kind of marry the two, because they are, no pun intended, marry the two, religious freedom or freedom of expression. But the idea of artistic freedom is a big deal. It really is. It's a big deal. Folks, you understand, if you go down this road where you can compel cake makers or artists, their services, your services belong to society. They don't belong to you if you want to have a business. I mean, that's what's at stake here. I mean, if there are any artists out there, I wonder if you would be okay with being restricted as to what you could write about, as let's say as an author or a playwright, or what you could paint, or what types of music you could compose. You know, there might be at some point in the future, who knows, there might be some note. I mean, everybody's super sensitive. There might be a note on the scale that's offensive to some group of people. Like, don't play this. I was actually, it's funny, is I was researching a conspiracy theory the other day. It was the one about hertz and the tunage. You know, you tune to A above middle C at a specific frequency, and it's a 440 hertz, right? And there's a conspiracy saying we didn't used to tune an A above middle C to 440 hertz. You used to tune an A above middle C to 432 hertz. Did you know this? And the conspiracy is, and there's a lot of people that support it and a lot of people that debunk it, but that there was no real unified tuning to 440 until about 1939, and they're saying that it was at the influence of Joseph Goebbels that it kind of got more uniform, that you tune your instruments to the A above middle C at 440 hertz. Matter of fact, any tuner that you buy, an electronic tuner that you buy now off of the shelf, is going to be automatically set to 440 hertz. You can change it down to 432. But they're saying that before that, there was actually a wide variance. Like, France might tune to A above middle C at this hertz and everything else. Well, the conspiracy is that 440 hertz makes your brain, more susceptible to suggestion, but 432 is more in line and more is what true concert pitch really should be. I know I'm getting off in the weeds here, but I'm just saying, at some point in the future, can you imagine if they said, because you never know what somebody's going to be offended by, right? Who could have predicted that people are offended by calling a man and a woman a woman? Even saying that phrase, a man and a woman, listen to your biases. You're saying, you're using the same standard to confirm your standard. Well, that's because I believe in some cases of self-evident truth, right? We've got to be able to, at some point, at least attempt to objectively define the world around us. But we throw that away now. We can define our own reality. One of the reasons that we have a parody where a guy's on his deathbed saying, I don't identify as a dead person, is because I'm trying to get across a point of certain realities that are concrete and black and white. It doesn't matter if you don't want to be dead. At this point right now in time, death is coming for us all. So, anyway, I say all that to say this is such a slippery slope. The fact that Jack Phillips here has been told that he doesn't have to bake the cake is like it is like a roadblock. You know what I mean? For the direction we're going. I mean, it is like, to me, a clear roadblock saying, all stop. I mean, it stops the direction that we were moving at lightning speed. I mean, it's just like just a huge brake that's been put on. Emergency brake, e-stop right now. The whole thing is shut down. And I don't know if we're going to go in the other direction, but the fact that we have stopped this erosion of our religious liberty, freedom of expression, artistic freedom. I mean, folks, I want you to think this is all connected. This is not just about whether or not you have the right to bake a cake or whether or not you have a right to have a cake baked for you. There's a reason that left-wing comedians won't go on college campuses anymore. And it's wrapped up in something like this. It's wrapped up in this issue. It's wrapped up in the idea of freedom of expression, whether it's religion, whether it's associating who you want to associate with. And we have Arkansas politicians, mind you, that have gotten caught up in this same nonsense. They've gotten caught up in this same nonsense of trying to, whether it's separate Martin Luther King Day from Robert E. Lee, trying to prove that the Republicans are not racist, but they don't understand that goes along with the same vein of trying to edit our history and remove Confederate statues because they're trying to perfect man. They think somehow they can do it if they edit our history instead of learning from it and making sure it never happens again. It's all caught up in this hypersensitivity, and this is a big deal. It's a huge shift in the other direction. I hope it's in the other direction. I think at the very least it's just a big roadblock where we're kind of at a standstill. We got to make a decision now. Freedom of expression the right to your own property, the right to be able to yeah, I know we got to move on here, but anyway. So that was the phrase gay marriage. We're going over the phrase gay marriage in this decision. If you're just joining us, huge day for the country, and a huge day for the First Amendment. So then we have the next phrase, gay marriage here. This is, what is this? It says 2 of 8 here. Well, maybe there's... Oh, it's on. Okay. Oh, it's what page it's on. Okay, my apologies. Okay, let's find. Okay, 8 pages that reference gay marriage in the opinion. So it's talking about this Colorado tribunal, picking up here, which says no commissioners. No commissioners objected to the comments. Let's start at the top. That consideration was compromised, however, meaning the consideration for Phillips and his religious freedom by the commission's treatment of Phillips' case, which showed elements of a clear and impermissible hostility towards the sincere religious beliefs motivating his objection. Stop. Again, you have the couple saying we were discriminated against. The Supreme Court says no, he was discriminated against. Do you understand what a big deal this is? That the religious guy, that the Christian religious guy, he was the one discriminated against? Again, a rebuke. It's also a validation of what we talked about 2 weeks ago. The fact is, yes, secularism is a worldview as well. Secularism can oppress Christianity. And the fact is, if we could just get away from labels and quit labeling everything and just allow the freedoms that we're given by our Creator and quit trying to oppress each other because we want people that heartily approve with our lifestyle and just let people live. You are free in this country, thankfully, unlike other countries in the Middle East specifically, to be gay if you want to be gay. And now, supposedly, you have a right to marry, which is strange because I don't feel like as a heterosexual that the government gives me a right to get married. I would get married within the confines of a biblical worldview, whether the government told me I could or not. I don't need them to recognize my private life for me to feel good about myself, or for me to feel complete, or for me to feel like it's, where do you find your validation? Where do you find your identity? That's what it is. Where do you find your identity? Now, some people, I guess, do find it in a lot of different things. There's a lot of different places to find it. And I've found my identity in false things before instead of in Christ where it belongs. But again, this is my biblical worldview. But there are some people that, they're gonna find their identity in the government recognizing their marriage, I guess. You know what I'm saying? I guess that's a whole nother argument here. So it goes on. As the record shows, some of the commissioners at the commission's formal public hearings endorsed the view that religious beliefs cannot legitimately be carried into the public sphere or commercial domain, disparaged Phillips' faith as despicable, and characterized it as merely rhetorical, and compared his invocation of his sincerely held religious beliefs to defense of slavery and the Holocaust. Stop. Now, why? Because they don't believe in God themselves. That's the only reason why you would ever do that to somebody. That's the only reason why. Because they think you're pretending. They think you're pretending. If they're atheists and they don't believe in a higher power, people that do believe in a higher power, they say we believe in science and everything's provable. And over here, of course, a lot of their scientific stuff requires just as much faith as somebody who is religious and believes in a higher power, but that's another argument for another time. But the only way they would think that, and I talked to these people back when the governor refused to sign the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, there were all these LGBT people at the Capitol, and I did a few man-on-the-street interviews with them. And, folks, I'm telling you, it was amazing. The idea, they didn't understand the concept of a religious conviction. They rejected it outright. They didn't believe that you were being sincere, and even if you did, they don't think you should have a right to do business. They just believe, and I really believed it was because they don't believe in a higher power. They don't even want to entertain it, and so if they don't entertain the idea, then they can't respect their fellow citizens who do believe it. They don't believe it's honest. They think you're just an evil, discriminating, villain. Like imagine, high shoulders Chuck Schumer at the State of the Union address. That kind of. Boy, he looked like a comic book villain. Okay. Moving on. No commissioners objected to the comments, meaning when one commissioner told this guy, Jack Phillips, that his faith was despicable, they characterized it as rhetorical. They compared his invocation of his sincerely held religious beliefs to the defense of slavery and the Holocaust. No commissioners objected to the comments, nor were they mentioned in the later state court ruling or disavowed in the briefs filed here. The comments thus cast doubt on the fairness and impartiality of the commission's adjudication of Phillips' case. Another indication of hostility is the different treatment of Phillips' case and the cases of other bakers with objections to anti-gay messages who prevailed before the commission. The commission ruled against Phillips in part on the theory that any message on the requested wedding cake would be attributed to the customer, not to the baker. Yet, the division did not address this point in any of the cases involving requests for cakes depicting anti-gay marriage symbolism. The division also considered that each bakery was willing to sell other products to the prospective customers, but the commission found Phillips' willingness to do the same irrelevant, meaning there were other cases where they didn't come down hard on them, because they didn't want to do an anti-gay cake, but you can do but we'll do this other stuff for you. And so this was a blatant example of taking someone who's a Christian and persecuting them because they're a Christian. That is what this ruling is really saying, is that. And that's why it's not broad. That's not why, because people are saying this is going to lead to people putting signs on their door saying no gays served here. No, it's not. That's not what this is about. By the way, the civil rights movement, the civil rights legislation you're going to have a hard time with that one, with that actually ever happening. But what this is saying is that this man was a Christian with a biblical worldview, and his right to have his biblical worldview was just upheld by the United States Supreme Court on the basis that he was discriminated against for his sincerely held religious beliefs. We got to take a break. Big day for America. Back in a moment.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
It's a PHP parody.
Hey, man, you got any of that marble rock?
Yeah, I've got the hookup.
Thanks. I need a fix real bad. I'm itching to grow some government.
How much you need?
I'm gonna need a taxpayer's dime bag.
No problem, sir. 1 taxpayer dime of marble rock. Enjoy.
Thanks, man. They don't call it Little Rock for nothing. Am I right?
Did you know your state representative or state senator may be addicted to growing government? The drug is called marble rock, and too much of it will cause marble fever. Watch for the warning signs. Does your legislator suddenly display a lack of humility when faced with basic questions? Does he or she suddenly develop hubris and pride that was not present during the campaign for office? These are signs they might be smoking the terrible drug, marble rock. The solution? Detox. Vote for detox. Vote to send them home for their own good.
Warning! Some politicians once voted out of office will not go home and stay in Little Rock to get their fix by lobbying, also known as the Burris Syndrome.
PHP parody.
Exposing the truth and everything the Marble Palace establishment keep trying to cover up. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about the moral low ground. The moral low ground. We're going to be talking about that coming up here at 7:05. To answer Pastor Dan Borum's question or speculation on our Facebook page, are they going to come after ministers next? Here's part of the opinion on page 13. But it's 4 of 8 on the gay marriage search. When it comes to weddings, it can be assumed, listen to this, this is huge for clergy. When it comes to weddings, it can be assumed that a member of the clergy who objects to gay marriage on moral and religious grounds could not be compelled to perform the ceremony without denial of his or her right to the free exercise of religion. This refusal would be well understood in our constitutional order as an exercise of religion, an exercise that gay persons could recognize and accept without serious diminishment to their own dignity and worth. Yet, if that exception were not confined, then a long list of persons who provide goods and services for marriages and weddings might refuse to do so for gay persons, thus resulting in a community-wide stigma inconsistent with the history and dynamics of civil rights laws that ensure equal access to goods and services and public accommodations. It is unexceptional that Colorado law can protect, it is unexceptional that Colorado law can protect gay persons just as it can protect other classes of individuals in acquiring whatever products and services they choose on the same terms and conditions as are offered to other members of the public. And there are no doubt innumerable goods and services that no one could argue implicate the First Amendment. Petitioners conceded, moreover, that if a baker refused to sell any goods or any cakes for gay weddings, that would be a different matter, and the state would have a strong case under this court's precedents that this would be a denial of goods and services that would be beyond any protected rights of a baker who offers goods and services to the general public and is subject to a neutrally applied and generally applicable public accommodations law. Phillips claims, however, that a narrower issue is presented. He argues that he had to use his artistic skills to make an expressive statement, a wedding endorsement. So, again, this doesn't go as far as it needs to. But they do address that about the clergy, which I thought was very interesting. And this was a huge roadblock. Again, our country was moving in a fast direction to take away religious liberty, and now we're at least at a standstill, folks.
The news and talk of Northeast Arkansas. This is News Talk 101.3 FM and 1230 AM KBTM, Jonesboro, an EAB radio station.
Because our government, in Romans it tells us that governments are ordained by God, God being the higher power. So he delegates to man governments, but those governments are also to be under the auspices of God. And that makes it fair for everyone. That's how Thomas Jefferson came up with what he did. Let's think about this. I can say this is what's true. You can say, no, this is what's true. So there has to be an objective truth. We call that absolute truth. And this is what you get when you're under God. The truth does not have any friends, but it makes a lot of enemies.
Yeah.
Okay? So you can be a truth of the friend, but the truth is not going to try to be your friend. It is what it is.
Yeah.
So that's what we had. Remember that when we were growing up, we heard the term the golden rule. Well, where did that come out of? That came right out of the scripture, where Jesus said, do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. That's an objective truth. It doesn't matter how much money you have, where you live, what color you are. So all these things come when you're under God. So you have to maintain that. That's what makes this nation so great, this ideal. And the aligning of truths, when, people talk about the founders and, owning slaves and so forth and so on like that. But the very words that they wrote, the truth, had to line up with the truth, and eventually the truth caught up with this nation, and we've, that's what I mean. That's I'm talking about the Civil War.
Yeah.
So all these things began to unfold because it's part of the truth. And as Jesus said in Matthew 5:6, if you hunger and thirst after righteousness, you shall be filled. In other words, if you are a truth seeker, the truth will eventually come forward. Yeah. And so our founders understood that, and that one nation under God is what makes everything fair and equal for every person. Now, I love what Mark was talking about, the personal freedoms. There's nothing like personal freedom. It's remember the parable that Jesus told about the talents. He gave 1 5, 1 2, and 1 1. And each had an opportunity to do according to their own ability, whatever they desired to do with those talents. That's what personal freedom is. If I want to become something special in life, then I have the right when a nation is under God to be that. And if I want to just stand on the side of the road and hold a sign, well, I also have the freedom to do that. You can only get that when you're under God. We're not in a caste system where you have to be what the government tells you want to be.
Yeah,
so this is what's so powerful, one nation under God.
So we're going to be back here in just a moment with Secretary of State Mark Martin and Pastor Iverson Jackson. I have a few more questions. One of them has to do with, and this is just my own personal kind of thing that I've come up with, or thoughts that I've had about the state of the country today, and how the younger generation is able to recognize injustice. They just don't know what to do about it. So we're going to be back in just a minute, folks. Don't go anywhere. The Liberty Machine rolls on next. Come back to the program. Joe, I'm just saying I really admire you. I'm having to produce my own show, and it's not easy. So I'm just letting you know. Thank you for everything, Joe, our board up. I'm in the command center post because this is where our third mic is. All right, joining us now, we've got Secretary of State Mark Martin, who's back with us. Mark, thank you for being on the show, sir.
Thanks a lot.
And also we have Pastor Iverson Jackson. Now, he's going to be at this event, One Nation Under God. The College Republicans at A-State are hosting him. Also, the Arkansas Family Council Director, Jerry Cox, will be there. So that's going to be fun. Admission is free. It's tonight at 7:30 at Arkansas State University on the third floor of the Student Union. Seating is limited, but come one, come all right now. I want to talk a little bit about Iverson Jackson. He is the senior pastor of Zoe Bible Church in Little Rock. You received your bachelor's in business administration in 1985 from Southern Arkansas University and a master's degree in public administration from Webster University. And you're also retired as a lieutenant colonel in the military. So certainly thank you for your service. Tell us about how you wound up at Zoe Bible Church.
At Zoe Bible Church?
Yeah, Zoe, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Zoe.
My
Well, it's a Greek word which means life.
Okay.
So it looks like it's pronounced Zoe.
I was the whole Ecclesia college scandal. I've been pronouncing Ecclesia wrong for a long time, and somebody finally was like, "You're saying it wrong. This means church. You need to know how to say this word." Okay, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, Zoe Bible Church is the church that my wife and I founded in 1997, and so that's how we wind up there because we started the church there. So
good.
We just love what God has called us to do there.
Okay, so today in society, you mentioned a lot of people's problem. Look. You mentioned people what they say about the founders owning slaves and everything, and
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
I mean, just a big day after this Supreme Court decision reaffirming religious freedom and the First Amendment rights of Mr. Jack Phillips. You don't have to bake that cake. We did a whole hour on the subject, so go get the podcast, an entire hour on the subject. I gave my thoughts on it. Really, really powerful, really excited stuff that we get to talk about today. And I'm sure it's going to, just so you know, you're probably going to have a lot of liberal friends that you didn't know were liberal that are going to be outraged by this. That's all. That's always good to know. When there's something like this that happens, you're gonna somebody in your friend circle is gonna be furious for some reason. Anyway, we've got a new whiteboard up in the studio. I want to start with a whiteboard. It says moral low ground. That's right. That's right. While the country on religious freedom might be headed towards the moral high ground, here in Arkansas, it seems that we kind of, when you look at the corruption, the vast amounts of corruption that are in the headlines every single day here in the state of Arkansas, with politicians and stealing your money and being indicted and pleading guilty, and looks like we may have more guilty pleas to come. Who knows? Maybe we have more indictments to come. I got to thinking about it. The moral low ground. That's kind of the state of Arkansas's political institutions right now. I mean, specifically the state Senate. The state Senate is at a moral low. They are occupying the moral low ground right now. Senator Jake Files should have resigned a year and a half ago or a year ago, and yet the Republican Party did nothing. The Senate acted like they did something. They said, "Oh well, if he ever gets indicted or pleads guilty, then he'll have to step down from the Revenue and Tax Committee. Then he'll have to do it because then we've made this rule now." It's like, are you serious? Have you read the FBI affidavit? The man should have resigned. He should have been called to resign. There wasn't even a peep. Not a peep. No pressure. No public pressure. Why? Because you guys are friends? I mean, we can talk about how we want to restore the integrity of the Senate, but we didn't really care about the integrity of the Senate for a very long time last year. For a very long time. We really didn't care about the integrity of the Senate, did we? No, we did not. I'm, of course, referencing Senator Jim Hendren's comments when he was when he presided over the transition of the Arkansas Senate becoming a state agency under the governor, because the uncle and nephew situation. The Arkansas Senate is now a state agency under the executive branch, not the legislative branch. To me, it's a big deal. But anyway, he said he wanted to focus on the integrity of the Senate, restoring the reputation of the Senate. Senator Jim Hendren did, the governor's nephew. Well, I mean, with John Woods, okay, you got John Woods. You have Jake Files. Mm-hmm. Yep. And now we're starting to hear other senators mention in pleas. They're not accused of a crime, but you look at preferred family health care and you have who's a consultant, who's not a consultant. I don't know. Senator Linda Chesterfield was a consultant for a time, and then she wasn't anymore, getting paid. Okay. You have Senator A in the Hank Wilkins plea that is largely proven to be Senator Jeremy Hutchinson being involved in some capacity. Again, he's not accused of a crime. You also have Senator Cheatham, who is Senator B, because it says Senator B sponsored this act. You go look up the act, and it's Senator Cheatham. So he's in there. So, and then you have a lot of other reports of saying you have politicians in general submitting what they would be willing to testify to in court. This is a big deal. I just feel like we're at the moral low right now when it comes to, this is the Republican Party that's supposed to have the moral high ground, right? Compared to the Democrats, that's at least how they claim to be. But if you look at it, now it's near Democrats as well. I mean, Hank Wilkins is a Democrat. Leonard Chesterfield's a Democrat. It's just in the whole appearance. Like, I'm not trying to say everybody mentioned in these pleas is. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, look, this system down here is so complex that let's just give them the benefit of the doubt for now. It's so complex that you can't help but have the appearance of impropriety sometimes because it's so complex in the interworkings of the marble palace. And so, yes, this person over here may have done something wrong, but it's just, I work with these people every day, so it's hard not to have the appearance of impropriety. I would love, you know what I would love? I'd love if they'd be like, well, the appearance of impropriety doesn't mean you've done anything wrong, and the appearance of impropriety is just part of playing the game of politics, and that doesn't mean anything. And everybody should just accept it and be comfortable with it. I mean, this is a wide-ranging scandal, from GIF to Medicaid, all over the state, right? Rusty Cranford, Hank Wilkins, Eddie Cooper, John Woods, Micah Neal, Jake Files. By the way, special prosecutor's been appointed. Not only was it called for, it's now been appointed. David Hughes, headline, Arkansas Democrat Gazette, speaking of the moral low ground. I'm talking to you, Republican Party of Arkansas, that did nothing to call for Jake Files' resignation for a year after everybody knew he was guilty. Everybody knew Jake Files had done what he pled that he had done, and yet you let him stay in office as the head and chairman of the Revenue and Taxation Committee when he couldn't pay his own taxes? Headline, State probe of Files set with prosecutor's pick. Special prosecutor has been appointed, and it is, hang on, his name. Hang on, where is his name? Jason Barrett. So the special prosecutor coordinator, Bob McMahon, said Monday that one of his staff attorneys has been appointed, Jason Barrett. He's going to have, once he's sworn in, full prosecutorial investigative authority. Now, why is this happening? Because of the $80,000. Yes, Jake Files pled guilty to federal charges of wire fraud, bank fraud, and money laundering, and he's awaiting sentencing on those charges. But there's no mention, from what we can tell, of what about this $80,000 he got from a nursing home lobbyist right after he filed the tort reform amendment. Where did it go? What did it go to? What was it for? David Hughes writes that Hughes' request for a special prosecutor came after he asked in an April 10th letter to U.S. Attorney Dwayne Dak Keese whether an $80,000 wire transfer from nursing home industry executive David L. Norsworthy to Files Construction Company, FFH Construction, LLC, the most unlucky construction company in the world, on November 24, 2014, was a violation of federal law. That was what the question was. Violation of federal law. The letter, obtained by the Arkansas Democrat Gazette through an Arkansas Freedom of Information Act request, asked Keese whether federal officials investigated the transfer and whether it was part of the conduct for which Files was being sentenced in federal court. And then, of course, there was no comment from the U.S. attorneys because, you know, they say ongoing investigation. Other than I think there might have been an ongoing investigation response comment, you know, boilerplate type thing. So then Files pleads guilty to taking state money. Listen to what they say about this, though. This was interesting. They report that attorneys for the government want to sentence Files to the maximum 2-year prison sentence under federal sentencing guidelines for the crimes of basically taking our money to enrich himself. And they actually say that, quote, "This was his job, his responsibility, and his solemn duty as a senator, but Files betrayed this trust and used his authority over the GIF money not to promote economic and community development in his district, but to personally enrich himself instead, the government argued. To personally enrich himself instead. Everybody knew he was personally enriching himself a full year before he pled guilty. And the Republican Party of Arkansas, the governor of Arkansas, they said nothing. The Democrat Party at first didn't even say anything, which was weird. They didn't call for his resignation until the sworn FBI affidavit came out for the search warrant. Then they called for his resignation. Still crickets from the Republican Party of Arkansas. Crickets from the governor. Crickets from nephew, number one, Jim Hendren. Crickets. The moral low ground, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to it. Seems like every day we're living the moral low ground when it comes to Arkansas corruption. When it comes to the appearance of Arkansas corruption. Again, where is the plan to stop this stuff? Where is the plan to stop it? I mean, look, you might be able to deal with a corrupt Republican easier than you can an honest one, but I don't. That who cares? I mean, come on, like that. I'm sure you are. I'm sure it is easier. I'm sure it is easier. But this has got to stop. I mean, there's clearly something wrong down there. There's clearly a culture down there that has ensnared a lot of people. Right? I mean, let's start counting them up, okay, so far. Okay, so let's just go Eddie Cooper, okay, and let's then go Hank Wilkins, Rusty Cranford, and that's a big one. That's a doozy. Randall Shelton, Orrin Paris, okay, John Woods, Mike Neal, Jake Files. That's 8. And there's 8 lobbyists and politicians so far. Who am I missing? I know I'm missing. Oh, you think at the New Jersey lobbyist? That's 9, right? This is so 9 people so far, and I know they're not all directly related. And I think I'm leaving some out. But this is a lot bigger problem than you think, because there's also other people being mentioned with this. There's people who, at the very least, their trust was violated when they trusted, hey, yeah, send us some money up there. Send us some money up to old Ecclesia. Yeah, send us your money. And you had Michael Amaro send in the money, the governor's former chief of staff. Not to mention you have Michael Amaro, who just needs to be in a category all by himself. Because he's an attorney, he was able to legally get $120,000 from lobbyists. They just gave him the money. Well, they laundered it through a nonprofit. You know, this welcome to the moral low ground. You want to focus on the integrity of the Senate? Well, I don't think you can do that yet. I think we got to see who all's still in the Senate when this is all said and done. Don't you? Don't you think we got to figure out who's still going to be in the Senate when this is all said and done before we can start fixing the integrity of it? I think most of us were raised, to believe, this is right, this is wrong, stealing is wrong. We had to be taught that stealing was wrong, right? Naturally, because we're fallen, you don't have to be taught to steal. You don't have to be taught to, you have to be taught not to do those things, to deny those impulses. I'm a new father for the first time. I guess my daughter is 11 months old today, as a matter of fact, 11 months old. And it's amazing. She's cute. She's adorable. I love her to death. It's amazing. Being a father is an amazing experience. But even as an 11-month-old, I can see her her selfishness. I can see her will, attempting to dominate us, or she does this thing where she'll, like, if she's in a bad mood, she will intentionally hurt my wife, scratch her and stuff. She thinks it's funny, And it's like, you have to correct this behavior. Okay, well, so we're most of us are hopefully raised by parents that attempt to correct that behavior, and we're all still going to fail, and we're still going to falter, that sort of thing. But there's something that is happening when the types of people who want to run for office get all down there together, and they all start patting each other on the back, and then anything is possible. And then, a toe over the line, just kind of cross the line of it, and then it just gets more and more and more, and you go and you do more and more bad stuff. And then eventually the feds come down on you, and then eventually you contemplate murder. That's what happened with Rusty Cranford. Folks, this is big. This is really the moral low ground. Rusty Cranford, according to the feds, tried to have a guy killed. Nobody talks about it. I feel like more people are just, it's so unbelievable, they don't want to recognize that level of corruption here in Arkansas. Maybe it harkens back to what some people want to say are conspiracy theories about Arkansas. But hey, listen, we are operating along the same lines, the same system that we have been for a very long time, a bureaucratic system that's where these politicians, and they get down there at the Marble Palace, and the people have been voting for Republicans to reform that system, and it hasn't been done. It hasn't been done. The wheels are still turning. I mean, this is a system this system began the political careers that almost put 2 Clintons in the White House. And again, to my broadcast last hour, if Hillary Clinton had won, we would not have seen this court decision on religious freedom. I can promise you that. You wouldn't have seen Breyer and Kagan cross over. And I don't think you would have seen Kennedy. I don't think it would have been a 5-4. I really don't. I think this would have been a big I'm telling you, I think this would have been a big blow to religious freedom. But luckily Donald Trump won. Neil Gorsuch was on the court, and look what happened. We got to take a break. You're listening to Conduit News Radio. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back in just a moment.
This is for all you big government establishment Republicans out there. Hope you're listening. I keep a close watch on these votes of mine. I keep my finger in the wind all the time. I vote big government, and you will pay with your dime. 'Cause every time I toe the line. You know, there's always an excuse not to shrink government. It's much easier just to toe that line. I find it very easy to be rhino blue. I find I'm not alone when failing to come through. Yes, big government, I'm a fool for you. 'Cause every time I toe that line. Legislative sleight of hand would be an accurate description. Or you could just say, they can't quit towing that party line. As sure as night is dark and day is light, I'll vote big government both day and night. And act like I'm shocked when it all comes to light. 'Cause every time I toe the line. You know, the phrase toe the line is the equivalent of toe the mark, both of which mean to conform to a rule or standard. You could also call it the status quo. Tax and spend, I'm always on your side. I love writing government checks that I cannot hide. Buying people's votes always turns the tide, 'cause every time I toe the line. The Oxford Dictionary word histories. The idiom toe the line, from an athletics analogy, originated in the early 19th century. I hope you don't watch these votes of mine. Hope you don't see through the lies and slime. 'Cause I plan on spending with your dime. 'Cause every time I toe the line. You know, toeing the line is what the folks down in Little Rock call progress.
PHP Parody.
Determined to drain the swamp in Little Rock, it's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
So, Michael Wickline of the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette has a tweet about the House committee rooms got remodeled last year. He actually made Representative Kim Hendren, and not Jim Hendren, but Kim Hendren, kind of mad because he didn't like how you couldn't see everybody because the chairs were so tall. But Wickline reports that the state Senate committee rooms are getting a $1.8 million upgrade this summer and this fall, with most of the work slated for the old Supreme Court room. And we've got this tweet here by Conduit News. They should add cameras to all the rooms and chambers. With all the corruption going on in the state, transparency is needed more than ever. That is a great point. That is such a powerful, powerful, powerful point. I want you to think about that for a second. A lot of people don't know this, that the Senate does not stream their committees. They don't stream their committee meetings, so we have no record. They don't record their votes, and they don't stream the committee meeting. Now, they record some of their votes. So people would be like, we record some of our votes, Paul. You're a liar. Okay. I get worked up sometimes, and for all intents and purposes, you guys go down there. Let me rephrase this. For all intents and purposes, you guys go down there with the attitude to go on record the least amount of times possible. So you don't really record your votes in committees, do you? And you don't stream your committee. The House streams their committee meetings and archives them online. You guys don't. You won't put cameras in there. Why? Because you don't want the people to know the truth. That's the only reason. And with the amount of corruption that's going on right now in the state, transparency is needed more than ever. And I'll tell you something else. This corruption in Arkansas has happened in many cases. So, I mean, the governor's been governor for 3.5 years. This stuff's been going on. It's been coming out in the headlines under his watch, under his nephew's watch. Come on now. What are we going to do to restore the confidence of our government back to the people? What are we going to do? At some point, there's a level of responsibility and accountability to our leaders. It doesn't matter if you're friends with these people. What are we going to do to reform this system? We need more transparency. We need cameras in the Senate.
Kind of using that,
Eric Birch from Birch & Company is in here with us this
discount
morning.
everything
Eric,
that we have here today that might be good.
They think about the positivity.
And
they think,
as
man,
I
it
look,
sounds like a great job
across,
if I could go and
the
sell houses
scriptures
for Eric
and
Birch.
Bibles,
You guys actually
you
make
see
it easy
God
for people
using
to come in and see if they're a fit.
non-perfect men,
so we do.
broken men.
Those are the only ones in the Bible, except for one.
Except for one,
yeah,
right?
except for one.
I mean, you look at some of our best guys. You look at David. I mean, he's an adulterer, a murderer. I mean, bad stuff.
Can't control his children.
Yeah, exactly.
Come in, hang out, get the information.
And so,
we're located.
And this is lost on our generation, where they look
We're
back
also
in
gonna be
America and
doing
they
them
see
on
all that we
Facebook
have
Live.
today.
So if you're not,
and
so if you're not a friend
they
of
can
mine on
recognize
Facebook,
injustice. They can
shoot me a
recognize
friend
slavery.
request. It's just
Okay,
Eric Birch,
they can recognize an
right here in
injustice, like
Jonesboro.
even
I'll be
if
happy to friend you, and
we
then you
take
can
all
watch
the
those.
history
Then we
books that the
actually do a lot
liberals
of
write
other
about,
videos,
Columbus
on
and
there as well.
everything
So
that happened.
Definitely check that out. If you've got any questions real estate related, don't hesitate to give us a call. 870-847-7653.
Correct me if I'm wrong, because I really think this is the problem: is they can recognize injustice. What they're really seeking is the perfect approval of a holy God, in my opinion.
In my
but
experience,
they're trying to right the wrongs of history by editing it, getting rid of statues, in an effort to reconcile themselves. Feel free to
you
jump
can't. Going back to the founders. Again, our school systems have failed our students. For the most part, our public school systems have failed them. Because if you understand history in the context of what we're talking about, the United States of America, when I talk to people and I say, well, how long was slavery in America? A lot of times people say 400 years or 200, 300 years. I said, no, it was in America, in the United States of America for only 87 years. Because prior to that, there was no United States of America prior to 1776. There was no United States of America. There was an America, but not United States of America. And as part of the British crown, the colonies, they were forced to have slaves. Now, when I say forced, I don't mean they just brought slaves and said you had to have them. But you could not, by British law, free your slaves. So George Washington wanted to free his slaves. Thomas Jefferson wanted to free his slaves. But they were not allowed to free their slaves by British law. One of the most ardent supporters of the abolition of abolishing slavery in the United States was Thomas Jefferson. And these are facts that cannot, they're just a part of history. But if you only look surface deep, then you'll only see Thomas Jefferson, the slaveholder. And with respect to our young people, and, they're only hearing one part of the story. Because, if you listen to what we call the major networks, you're just going to hear all the negative about the United States of America, which is ironic because in this country, this is the only country they can say what they want to say because of the First Amendment. So those very founding fathers that they are denigrating are the reason they have the freedom to say what they're saying about them. So our young people just need to hear the truth.
Bringing you your daily dose of truth. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
the special interest, which is either a person's or a company's personal benefit, or is it benefiting the country as a whole? And if it's deemed to be the special interest of the country, then what is the role of government? Now, I would argue then that everybody universally, I believe, would agree that the primary role of the federal government is national defense, the common defense. Now, if you follow me to that point, then the next step is, how does the country defend itself? Well, it certainly doesn't build airplanes out of soybeans. It doesn't. Yes, we do need to eat, and there is an element of subsidy justification in the agricultural business so that we don't all starve to death. But where does that line stop and subsidizing exports begin? And that gets into the realm of the role of government then being assisting businesses, agricultural business or Kentucky whiskey or Harley-Davidson. I don't believe that it's the role of government to subsidize the export of those goods. Now, if it can and will in a passive way, absolutely. But as Americans, we got to where we are today by building things faster, better, and cheaper than anybody in the history of the world. That's why we won World War II. Not because we had more people, it's because we had more engines.
Yeah.
And more airplanes and more ships.
Yeah, we had a work ethic too that I think we're lacking today.
Well, that will rear its head as it needed. I do have full faith in the American people that when a crisis occurs, we can summon the strength to do these things. However, if our industry of aluminum production or steel production has been gutted and we no longer have the facilities that can operate at the capacity necessary or the technical ability to make these materials, we cannot defend the crops, the motorcycle plants, the whiskey plants. Somebody is going to take that away from us if we don't have better ships and planes and guns. And that, I would argue, is the primary role of government. Now in that arena, I do a lot of aerospace work, and I do some defense work. I have 0 government contracts. Never had any, never won any, because that doubles the price as soon as you start dealing with that kind of paper. Anyway, there are still on the books specifications for certain parts that require that the materials to make that part have never been transported by sea. Now, that is in specifications for parts today. So if I wanted to buy something that had a screw and I had to get it from Taiwan, it could not have traveled by sea to get to me per that specification, and that was because of the wartime 40s submarine warfare and the shipping. Well, now, what is different about that mentality than keeping a national defense industry expertise in this country?
Yeah.
Now, I can make that same argument for washers, dryers, and televisions, because if we don't make things anymore, our wealth is leaving.
That's a good point. Yeah, if you're not able to make stuff, and that has to do with access to resources, work ethic, that's where we get our prosperity from. And so that's an interesting argument about it being about the national defense. Okay, so we're talking with Joe Maynard, Arkansas small business owner, Conduit co-founder, as well as you heard him say his business is in aerospace, and he does some defense work. So when we report on these tariffs of 25% on steel, 10% on aluminum from the European Union, Canada, Mexico, and you look at kind of, like you said, where our manufacturing is now, our ability to make stuff that we need versus where it was, and then you look at what we've also done with China and that sort of thing, flooding the global market, as one report says, with these cut-rate metals and dragging down the prices and things like that. Just generally, Joe, do you think Donald Trump here is doing the right thing?
There is no question about it. And I have some experience with that because of the prices for especially the titaniums and the Inconels, the high heat metals that are used in aerospace. It is difficult to find those materials. A lot of the materials come out of Russia. And I can tell you that if a country decides to subsidize their industries so that they can capture the market and run all the other countries out of that business, and then they have a monopoly. And then at that point, if you want to buy a trigger for a nuclear weapon, let's say, and the only material is in China, I doubt you're going to get a deal on it, or you're going to get it at all. And if you don't know how to make it because all of your technology has been transferred to the other countries, the expertise, the experience, then you're going to be in a world of hurt. And no other product really can be looked at that way.
And also, I mean, how would you know if the trigger would work? I mean, do we know that the steel from China and aluminum, I mean, is what we want to make our planes out of? I mean, is there an inspection process? I mean, I would assume there is, but I mean, I don't know that for sure. Do you know?
There are ample safeguards in place, and there are, just like anything else, Japan in the 60s was a joke about making things because it was like cheap Japanese crap, but they stole, I guess they utilized our quality principles from a guy named Deming. They actually applied them where we laughed at the guy, and they became the best quality producers of everything they produce in the world. Now China is going to make that look like that's a neighborhood lemonade stand because they're going the same way. And I had run across some exotic aluminums that I can only find in Korea or Russia or somewhere else. A lot of times you're only allowed to buy right now for defense or aerospace. You're only allowed to buy from certain mills. You've got to certify that this material came from this particular steel mill or aluminum foundry, and you can't use it if it's not. And they have to then certify that the material was actually mined in the United States to make that steel. So there are, already some safeguards for national defense in place, but none of that matters, as I've said, if you can't retain the knowledge, experience, and the supply chain to get this stuff through any foreseeable global event. And that's why it's distinctly different than everything else. Just because arguably a business has overbuilt, and rightly so, because it's a free market, but rightly so, overbuilt for exports, and then all of a sudden the opposing country then says, well, we're not going to take any more wine from the United States. Well, that is an economic problem for that particular interest, but that is a risk they took. We can't be held hostage by maintaining our national defense posture and capability because somebody won't buy wine or soybeans or anything else.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, we're not. No one is guaranteed tomorrow. We don't know what the next day is going to bring. This is kind of an issue that has divided, some people on the right, some Republicans. Again, we're talking with Joe Maynard, Conduit co-founder, Arkansas small business owner, deals in aerospace and steel and aluminum, knows what he's talking about. You got House Speaker Paul Ryan. He's criticizing this Trump move. There are better ways to help American workers and consumers. He plans to work with the Trump administration on those better options. Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse says that the tariffs are, quote, dumb, and they are warning that it harkens us back to the Great Depression, saying we've been down this road before. What do you think about that? Is there a danger of going too far with this, or is it just a different world now than it was back then?
Well, Paul, I think the principles remain the same. Now, I would expect, and I don't have it in easily recallable memory, but there were probably special interests involved in those 30s and 40s that got us into this protectionism, trade, but it certainly wasn't national defense. And I think that they're comparing two different things, and they forget. Both those people have forgotten what the primary role of government is. It is not to run the economy. They believe it is. It is not to protect workers. It is not to create jobs. It is to provide a free and fair arrangement in the economy to let the free market work. National defense is apart and separate from that.
I see the point, yeah. So you're not necessarily saying because it's a global economy that we just want to focus on our national economy. You're just saying when it comes to being able to produce our own planes and our own ways to protect ourselves, we got to take that more seriously. We need to be able to do that here in our country, not dependent on China or whoever else wants to sell us their metals to make our planes that protect us.
Well, that's right. But by the fact that they are developing their industries, for example, the missile guidance, rocket guidance systems, well, it is my belief that Bill Clinton sold us out to Loral Space, using Loral Space, and sold that guidance technology to China in the 80s, and look at their space program now.
Yeah.
It perhaps is going to get better than us, and I'll bet you that he didn't lose any money on that deal.
No, I bet you he didn't either. Yeah, and now we're obviously giving our taxpayer money from Arkansans away to Chinese companies to move here.
Absolutely, and who benefits in the short term versus the long term? The people that benefit are the special interest and their politician puppets, and they're way long gone before the consequences are visited on the American people. And I take that very seriously. Wow. And I would expect some in the Arkansas legislature would as well. Regardless of if you sell 50% of your soybeans to China, well, oh well. That was a risk you took to get into that market to build your business. If they're going to retaliate, what can you do about it? I mean, it's a race to the subsidy bottom.
Yeah. Well, and then there's also, somebody was I think we were talking with somebody the other day, and they were saying, I think it was Congressman Rick Crawford, he was saying, as far as the farm subsidies go, China desperately needs the farm subsidies. There's other countries that normally, I'm sorry, not the farm subsidies, but the soybeans. They desperately need the soybeans, and there's other countries that are supposed to be producing soy that are having bad years, and so, I mean, they're going to have to buy our soybeans, and right now there just might be a stare down going on.
Well, weather aside, which is not an insignificant factor for farming, we've got the best, most productive farmers on the face of the earth, and if they need to be able to compete, but that's their business. To be able to provide for the needs of the United States, I don't have a problem having a discussion about subsidizing that capacity, but beyond that, no.
So, Joe, you mentioned, this back and forth earlier with, technology, having to buy, let's say, a trigger or something from China. Let's talk about this theft of technology. You also mentioned Bill Clinton selling our missile technology over there. Is that a risk in all of this? Is it a risk that we're going to have some, intellectual property theft?
Well, I mean, that has happened in spades for the last 20 years. And not only have corporations had short-term vision on this because of short-term profits, quarterly statements are what drive their success in the short term. China will gladly make something for us very cheap if they can acquire the expertise to make it. And then once that expertise is acquired, then they start the monopoly game of driving everybody else out of business so that they have a monopoly, and then the prices go to where the market will bear. It's very interesting about the way China approaches this. They feel like if they have bought the technology, so to speak, by offering labor and money to a American company, and then they just add labor value to it, and then they have their people that grow and understand, and I'm saying good for them. That's a great plan. If you want to be the leader in industrial production on the globe, they're doing it the right way. They have got a good long-term vision, and these are smart people. But they don't do the work of inventing and developing. They just bribe. In other words, for lack of a better word, they bribe.
Well, yeah,
government people.
Isn't that what? Yeah, and isn't that what government does? Let's just say in a nutshell here. Okay, I'm going to make a comparison. We have government, and I've said this before. A lot of people that wind up in government, not all, but a lot of them, if they don't have jobs of their own, they can't create. And they end up being for big government because that supports themselves, and they end up wanting to take what others can create. And you have no better example of that than China. We need to remember, Joe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but China's a communist country. They don't really have private ownerships. At any moment, the government could come in and, accuse them of party disloyalty. And so every secret, nothing remains secret. I mean, so the government is there to watch what all these companies are doing, what they're doing for American companies for real cheap, and then boom, like you said, they have the technology, and then they take that information that they didn't create themselves, and they try to, we think in maybe 5-10 years. I feel like China thinks in like 100-year plans. They are very intelligent when it comes to that aspect of plotting.
Well, they have a definite target industries that they target until they take them to a certain level that they can control them. Timber industry, for example, we can't make hardwood floors in America when we have the trees to start with, and compete with China, taking timber out of the country, processing it, sending it back in a package and selling it back to us, and they're making all the value add. Now, just because at this point they are so adept at that they can come back and get us to give them more of our taxpayer money to build a plant and create jobs, selling us our own hardwood back is just beyond it just blows me away. But when you look at how the money works and who the senators and representatives represent in Little Rock, you recall that audio we have of whoever it was saying
Mike
the Chinese
Preston.
delegation. These are your representatives now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was a Freudian slip if I ever saw one.
Yeah, it sure is. Well, okay, I think we'll wrap things up. But Joe, I'll give you the last word. I just want to reiterate. You obviously are somebody who's directly affected by this, and I guess you have seen, you've seen this slow. Devolving into where we are now, and now it seems like President Trump is trying to correct a wrong here, not just for you, but for a lot of people in your business.
I don't know the man, but by what I see, what the principles that he's applying and executing are exactly what this country needs. The amount of industry that has left this country, which does equal jobs, but that's not the point necessarily, but the amount of industry and expertise and facilities that have closed and left this country, and Obama was partially right. Those jobs are not coming back according to that trajectory. Well, Donald Trump has changed the trajectory, and I can tell you that we need to, quit worrying about the salamander and quit worrying about, minimum wages, and let's get on with making this country great again. We were the best in the world at one point, and we can be there again. The people have it in them. It's the government through its, objectors that are the big world order people. Why do they have a seat at the table? They don't need a seat at our table. Canada, EU, Mexico, they are interested in what's good for them. Believe me, they're not interested in what's good for us. This I can tell you.
Joe Maynard, I appreciate it, sir. Let's do it again soon.
Okay, Paul. Anytime I can help. I'm here to help.
Folks, we got to go to break. Back in a minute. Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is building a liberty machine. Find out more at conduitnews.com.
All right, folks, that's about all the time we have for today. I want to thank Joe Maynard for coming on the program, really shedding some firsthand knowledge about what's going on with the tariff situation and the problems, the errors that President Donald Trump is trying to correct. Very, very interesting, very exciting times, quite honestly. Folks, if you want to get this broadcast, you can. It's over at conduitnews.com, facebook.com/conduitnews. Go to YouTube, search for Conduit News, subscribe, hit the little bell for notifications so that we can be discriminated against for being conservatives. That's all the time we have. We'll be back here tomorrow. Arkansas, thank you so much for being with us. Be safe.